Okay, so let's open for your questions. James, go ahead, please. Please, if you could identify yourself and the person to whom you want to address the question.
My name is James.
Just a second.
Yeah, my name is James Smith, and my question is really addressed to Jan Mujahideen. I really look forward to reading your book, and I don't doubt that it provides a very, very rich description of how foreign policies in various countries have been this decade. I was just wondering if you could expand a little more on how everything you're saying relates to changes at the international level in strategic and economic terms. Because, I'm, as somebody who focuses on those, I guess myself, I'm very interested to know, how changes in polarity in the region over the last 10 years have brought out this particular balance in between ideology and pragmatism, and the fact that Latin America's regional politics have become vastly more complex over the last 20 years. If, for example, as part of your book, in every country case, you had compared the foreign policy now with the foreign policy in, for example, the 1970s under very different international conditions, how many of those explanations to do with organizational culture, etc., would still stand? I'd just be interested to hear really about the international level. Thank you.
I'm taking a number of questions, or shall I answer?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's have several questions. So, yes, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Jonathan Diolu, and I want to inquire about something that is unfolding as we speak, and that is the visit of President Mahmoud Abbas to many Latin American countries. And my question is whether the decision of Latin American countries like my own country, the Dominican Republic, to support the bid for Palestinian statehood, is it along the lines of ideology or pragmatism? Country that has a great dependency, say to the United States, like the Dominican Republic, aligning itself with Palestine and this unilateral venture. Is it ideology or pragmatism? Is it the fruit of the ever more multipolar world that we live in? I ask the question. Thank you very much.
Another question, third question? Yes, go ahead.
Thanks. Nick Copeland from Paraguay. In your analysis, did you bring out any threads or viewpoints as to the future regional bloc, which might be the preeminent one? We have, OAS, UNASUR, Mercosur, ALBA, the deflating balloon. But I'm very interested in your view on the coming preeminent bloc, if that will ever actually exist.
Thank you. Dr. Gardini.
Well, thank you for these very interesting and challenging questions. To answer some of them, I would probably need a crystal ball or a very nice contract with Oxford Analytica, who are supposed to give answers, whereas Charles and I are in a relatively easier position because academics are supposed to raise more questions. But nonetheless, I'll try. James, in relation to changes at the international level, one of the 5 factors I have identified in the, rather than theoretical, I like to call it analytical framework. It's not a theory trying to explain big things, it's just a framework for analysis, with of course some theoretical implications. Factor number 5 relates to the structural context, be that domestic or international. And one of the things I discuss is in fact how the box influences what happens within the box. Okay, so to give a proper example to the question B you asked, so how can you compare your analytical framework or apply to events in the 1970s?
That was just a random example.
Perfect, and I think certain factors are applicable straight away. It's very direct, the influence of leaders, the process through which foreign policy is designed, adopted, and implemented. What certainly changes is who is the leader there? What are their values? Moving on to your specific point, And the international system? Well, of course, we know in international relations theory that the shape or the polarity or the structures characterizing the international system do play a role. Of course, if you live in a bipolar world, your number of options in foreign policy as a Latin American country would be constrained as compared to today. I mean, I cannot see Hugo Chavez saying during the 2008 ambassadors crisis, what happens if the US decides to limit their trade relations with your country? And he said, well, we will find someone else. Russia is already coming in. That's what he said at the time. So I can hardly see that happening in the 1970s, both because of Hugo Chavez himself, but also because of the international circumstances. So I think now you have a bigger variety of actors, of issues on the agenda. Certain issues were not even on the agenda in the 1970s, probably will not be in 20 years, we will have others. So I can give you other examples, but I think this would be my answer. There is something about the international context, the way in which the international context is characterized certainly does play a role. On the Palestine issue, what I do say in the analytical framework is that this framework provides ideas, guidelines to conduct further analysis. So the analytical framework itself would not signal whether alignment or approval for the Palestine cause is a symptom or manifestation of pragmatism or ideology. You should refer to the specific combination in a specific country. Okay, so you're free to apply the 5 factors I have designed to the foreign policy issue of Palestine and see how it performs with reference to a specific country, the Dominican Republic or any other. So I'm not able to go any further than that because I should probably know much more than I in fact do about the specific situation of each country to tell you whether this is a sign towards a more or less pragmatic or ideological position.
I would address a question to His Excellency. I think Mahmoud Abbas is on his way to Colombia.
I'll answer later.
Shall
The answer is very clear, very simple, but I would like to give you comments.
I'll get you off that hook by providing a slightly less cautious response than Gianluca. It seems to me that what's interesting, I mean, I think that there is an element of principle in this wave of recognition that moves towards recognition. I prefer to say that than ideology. And what's at stake when people make principled decisions of this sort is the probability of punishment. Now, this cuts several ways. I mean, the United States in recent years has very often been, to my mind, offensively unilateralist in some of its policies, but it knows it won't really get seriously punished, so that's fine. Weaker countries have to think more carefully about it, but I think there are lots of examples, and the crucial one that crops up in the book at various points is the decision, particularly of Chile, not to back the United States' second resolution on Iraq. And you know, something like that, you have to think, well, what will the consequences be? And very often the consequences are less awful than they look as though they're going to be. It's like default. I shouldn't say this at the moment, but actually, after you default, and as a historian, I think back to Argentina in 1890, the Bering crisis. They were back on their feet in about 2.5 years because export prices. You get away with it. Because what else are the bankers going to do except negotiate with you? You know, I shouldn't be saying this. You're in a strong position to default.
I was actually going to say virtually the same thing. I mean, I would emphasise that this is my view rather than Oxford Analytica's. In the specific case of the Dominican Republic, I think it's quite an interesting mix of ideology and pragmatism. It's a question of, on the one hand, it plays well domestically.